The Radiant Shell by Paul Ernst. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Radiant Shell. And that, gentlemen, said the Secretary of War, is the situation. Arvania has stolen the Ziegler plans and formulae. With their acquisition, it becomes the most powerful nation on Earth. The Ziegler plans are at present in the Arvanian embassy, but they will be smuggled out of the country soon. Within a month of their landing in Arvania, war will be declared against us. That means, he glanced at the tense faces around the conference table, that we have about 3 months to live as a nation, unless we can get those plans. There was a hushed, appalled silence, broken at last by General Forsyth. Nonsense! How can a postage-stamp country like Arvania really threaten us? The day has passed, General, said the Secretary, when a nation's power is reckoned by its size. The Ziegler heat ray is the deadliest weapon yet invented. 1,000 men, with a dozen of the ray projectors, can reduce us to smoking ruins while remaining far outside the range of our guns. No, I tell you, that declaration of war by Arvania will be followed by the downfall of the United States inside of 3 months. Again, the hushed, strained silence descended over the conference table, while one white-faced man gazed at another, and all speculated on the incredible possibility of a world in which there was no United States of America. We must get the plans, nodded Forsyth, convinced at last. But how? March openly on the Arvanian embassy? No, that would be a declaration of war on our part. The World Court, which knows nothing of the Ziegler plans, would set the league at our throats. Send volunteers unofficially to raid the place? Impossible. There is a heavy guard in the Arvanian embassy, and I more than suspect the place bristles with machine guns. What are we to do? Demanded Forsyth. The Secretary seemed to have been waiting for that final question. I have had an odd and desperate plan submitted me from an outside source. I could not pass it without your approval. I will let you hear it from the lips of the planner. He pressed a buzzer. Bring Mr. Winter in, he told his secretary. The man who presently appeared in the doorway was an arresting figure. A man of 30-odd, with the body of an athlete, belied somewhat by the pallor of an indoor worker, with acid-stained, delicate hands, offset by forearms that might have belonged to a blacksmith, with coal-black hair and gray eyes so light as to look like ice-gray holes in the deep caverns of his eye-sockets. This was Thorne Winter. Gentlemen, the scientist, Mr. Winter, announced the Secretary. He thinks he can get the Ziegler plans. Thorne Winter cleared his throat. My scheme is simple enough, he said tersely. I believe I can walk right into the embassy, get the plans, and then walk right out again. It sounds kind of impossible, but I think I can work it by making myself invisible. Invisible? Echoed Forsyth. Invisible? Precisely, said Thorne, in a matter-of-fact tone. I have just turned out a camouflage which is the most perfect yet discovered. It was designed for application to guns and equipment only. I never thought of trying to cover a human body with it, but I'm sure it can be done. But invisible? Muttered Forsyth, glancing askance at Winter. There's no time for argument, said the Secretary crisply. The question is, shall we give this man permission to try the apparently impossible? All heads nodded, though in all eyes was doubt. The Secretary turned to the scientist. You are aware of the risk you run. You realize that if you are caught, we cannot recognize you, that we must disclaim official knowledge of your work and leave you to your fate. Thorn nodded. "Then," said the Secretary, his voice vibrant, "yours is the mission, and on your effort hangs the fate of your country. Now, what help will you require?" "Only the assistance of one man," said Thorn, "and since secrecy is vital, I'm going to ask you, sir, to be that man." The Secretary smiled, and with that smile he seemed to be transformed from a great leader of affairs into a kindly human individual. "I am honored, Mr. Winter," he said. "Shall we go at once to your laboratory?" In the great laboratory room, the Secretary glanced about almost uneasily at the crowding apparatus that was such an enigma to one untrained in science. Then his gaze returned to Winter's activities. Thorn was carefully stirring fluids, poured drop by drop from various retorts in a mixing bowl. All the fluids were colorless, and they combined in a mixture that had approximately the consistency of thin syrup. To this Thorn added a carefully weighted pinch of glittering powder. Then he lit a burner under the bowl and thrust into the mixture a tiny, specially constructed thermometer. "You can really make yourself invisible?" breathed the Secretary. "I can," said Thorn. "If the blisters don't upset my calculations by making my body surfaces too moist for the stuff to stick to. I'm going to have you paint me with it, you see, and it was never intended to cover flesh." He regulated the burner anxiously, and then began to take off his clothes. "Ready," he said at last, glancing at the thermometer and turning off the burner. He stood before the wondering Secretary, a fine, muscular figure. "Take this brush and cover me with the stuff, and be sure not to miss any of me." And then the Secretary saw why Thorn had said the colorless paint was never intended to be applied to human flesh, for it was still seething and smoking in the cauldron. "Good heavens!" he said. "Don't you want to wait till it cools a little?" "Can't," said Thorn. "It has to be applied hot or it loses its flexibility." The Secretary dipped the brush and began to paint the naked flesh of the scientist. Not a quiver touched that flesh as an almost microscopically thin, colorless layer formed into a film after the brush strokes. But the Secretary's fingers shook a little. "My God, man," he said finally, "doesn't it hurt?" "It's a little like being boiled in oil," replied Thorn grimly. "Outside of that it's all right. Hurry before the stuff gets too cool." The clinging thin shell covered him to his chest, then to his throat. At that point he reached into a drawer in a workbench beside him and drew out two small, hollow hemispheres of glass. These he cupped over his eyes. "What are those for?" asked the Secretary. "So my eyes can be covered with the film. If they weren't, I'd present the somewhat remarkable spectacle of a pair of disembodied eyes walking down the street." Painfully, agonizingly, the hot film was applied to throat and face, over the glass spheres that cupped around the eyes, over a tight leather cap covering the scientist's hair, and over a sort of football nose guard which extended down an inch below the end of Thorn's nose in a sort of overhanging offset that would allow him to breathe and still keep his nostrils hidden. The Secretary stepped back. Before him stood a figure that looked not unlike a glazed statue of a man. The effect was that of a body encased in clear ice, and like clear ice, the encasing shell sparkled and glittered radiantly in the sunlight that poured in at the windows. Thorn moved. His glazed arms and legs and torso glistened with all the colors in the spectrum, while under the filmed bulges of glass his eyes looked as large as apples. The Secretary felt a chill of superstitious fear as he gazed at that weird and glittering figure with its enormous glazed eyes. "But you aren't invisible,"